The white silk dress weighed 1,000 pounds as Greta Emmerson stumbled through the darkness, her lungs burning with each ragged breath, her bare feet bleeding from the rocky terrain of the New Mexico desert that stretched between the church and whatever sanctuary she might find. Behind her, voices shouted her name, and lanterns bobbed like angry fireflies in the night, but she kept running, clutching the layers of expensive fabric in her trembling hands, knowing that if they caught her, she would be dragged back to marry a man whose eyes held nothing but cruelty and whose promises whispered in her ear had turned her blood to ice. The ranch appeared like a mirage in the moonlight, a modest spread of weathered buildings and corrals that looked blessedly empty and quiet. Greta's vision blurred with exhaustion as she approached, her elaborate veil long since torn away by mesquite branches, her carefully styled hair falling in tangled waves around her shoulders. The voices behind her grew louder, closer, and panic seized her chest as she searched desperately for somewhere to hide. The barn stood slightly apart from the main house, its doors hanging open just wide enough for a desperate woman to slip through. She practically fell into the building, catching herself against a wooden post as her legs threatened to give out entirely. The smell of hay and horses filled her nostrils, oddly comforting despite her terror. Above her head, she spotted a loft, and without thinking, she gathered her ridiculous dress and began climbing the ladder, each rung an agony against her torn feet. She collapsed into the hay just as the sound of horses thundered past the barn, and she pressed her face into the scratchy golden strands, holding her breath until she thought her lungs would burst. The horses passed. The voices faded, and Greta Emmerson, who had been minutes away from becoming Mrs. Harold Pritchard, began to cry silent tears into the hay that smelled of summer and safety. She must have fallen asleep from pure exhaustion, because the next thing she knew, dawn light was streaming through the gaps in the barn walls, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. Her body ached everywhere, her feet throbbed with pain, and the wedding dress that had cost her father 3 months' wages was torn and stained beyond recognition. She lay perfectly still, listening for any sign that she had been discovered, but heard only the gentle shuffling of horses in their stalls below and the morning song of birds greeting the day. Then came the sound of boots on the barn floor, steady and unhurried, and Greta's heart leaped into her throat. She pressed herself deeper into the hay, praying that whoever had entered would not think to look up into the loft, would not find the runaway bride who had caused such scandal in Hachita, New Mexico last night. "I know you are up there," a man's voice said quietly, and Greta froze. The voice was deep and calm, with none of the anger she expected. "Saw your footprints in the dust when I came in to feed the horses. You are bleeding and you left a trail right to the ladder." Greta closed her eyes, tears leaking from beneath her lashes. Of course she had left a trail. She was an idiot, a foolish woman who had thought she could run away from her problems in a wedding dress and bare feet. Now she would be dragged back, and Harold Pritchard would make sure she never tried to escape again. "I am not going to hurt you," the voice continued, and she heard him moving closer to the ladder. "And I am not going to turn you in if that is what you are running from, but you are injured and you need help. Why don't you come down and we can talk about this like civilized people?" Something in his tone made her believe him, or perhaps she was simply too exhausted to keep hiding. Slowly, painfully, Greta crawled to the edge of the loft and looked down. The man standing at the base of the ladder was tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He wore simple working clothes, a battered hat in his hands, and his face held no threat, only concern. "My feet," she said hoarsely, her voice rough from crying and running. "I cannot climb down. They are torn up pretty badly." He studied her for a moment, then nodded and set his hat on a nearby post. "All right, stay there. I will come up and help you down." He climbed the ladder with practiced ease, and when he reached the loft, Greta could see him more clearly. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with a strong jaw and sun-bronzed skin that spoke of years working outdoors. His eyes widened slightly when he took in her appearance, the ruined wedding dress and tangled hair and tear-stained face, but he said nothing, only moved closer with careful, deliberate steps. "My name is Carter Robbins," he said softly, crouching beside her in the hay. "This is my ranch, such as it is. You are safe here, I promise you that." "Greta," she whispered. "Greta Emmerson." "Well, Miss Emmerson, let us get you down from this loft and see about those feet of yours." He held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip steady as he helped her sit up. Then, before she could protest, he scooped her up in his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing at all, wedding dress and all. "I can walk," she said automatically, though they both knew it was a lie. "Not on those feet. You cannot," Carter replied, and carried her down the ladder with the same ease he had climbed it. He took her straight to the main house, kicking open the door and carrying her inside to a kitchen that smelled of coffee and bacon. He set her gently in a chair by the table, then went to pump water into a basin. The house was small but well kept, with none of the clutter she had expected from a bachelor cowboy. The floors were swept, the dishes clean, and everything had its place. She watched him move around the kitchen, gathering supplies with quick efficiency, and felt something loosen in her chest. He had not asked her questions. He had not demanded explanations. He had simply helped her, as if finding runaway brides in his hayloft was a common occurrence. "This will sting," he warned, kneeling in front of her with the basin of water and clean cloths. He lifted her right foot with gentle hands, and Greta sucked in a breath as he began washing away the blood and dirt. His touch was careful, almost tender, and she found herself studying the top of his head as he worked, the way his hair fell across his forehead, the concentration on his face. "You were getting married," he said after a long silence, and it was not a question. "I was supposed to," Greta replied quietly. "To Harold Pritchard. Do you know him?" Carter's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and his hands stilled for just a moment before continuing their work. "I know of him. He owns the big ranch south of town, has a reputation for being hard on his workers." He paused, choosing his words carefully, "and hard on anyone who crosses him." "He is a monster," Greta said flatly, and then the words came pouring out like water from a broken dam. "My father owed him money, gambling debts, and Harold said he would forgive everything if I agreed to marry him. Papa did not want to accept, but we had no choice. We would have lost everything, the house, the store, everything. So I agreed because what else could I do? But then last night, right before the ceremony, I overheard him talking to one of his men. He was laughing about how once we were married, he would teach me to be obedient, break me like one of his horses. He said I was too spirited, but that he liked the challenge. And I could not do it. I could not walk down that aisle and promise to love a man who thought of me as something to be broken." Carter had finished cleaning her feet and was wrapping them in strips of clean cloth, his movements sure and practiced. When he looked up at her, his eyes were serious. "You did the right thing," he said simply. "No woman should marry a man like that, debt or no debt." "My father," Greta said, and fresh tears welled in her eyes. "Harold will punish him for this. He will take everything." "Your father would rather be poor than see you hurt," Carter said with quiet certainty. "Any decent father would." He was right, Greta knew. Her father had tears in his eyes when he had walked her to the church, had squeezed her hand so tight it hurt, as if he could not bear to let her go. but knowing Harold would punish him for her escape made her chest ache with guilt. "They were searching for me last night," she said. "They came right past the barn." "I heard them," Carter admitted, standing and washing his hands in the basin. "I stayed in the house and kept the lights off." Figured if someone was running from Harold Pritchard's wedding, they had good reason. "You are not worried about him coming here? About what he might do if he finds out you helped me?" Carter's expression hardened slightly, and for the first time, Greta saw steel beneath his calm exterior. "Harold Pritchard does not frighten me, and this is my land. I will help whoever I choose to help." He poured coffee into 2 cups and set one in front of her, then pulled out a chair and sat down across the table. The morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, and for a moment, everything felt surreal. Yesterday morning, she had been preparing to marry a man she feared. Now she was sitting in a stranger's kitchen, wearing a ruined wedding dress, drinking coffee with a cowboy who had saved her without asking for anything in return. "You can stay here," Carter said, wrapping his hands around his coffee cup. "In the barn, I mean, up in the loft. It is not fancy, but it is dry and warm, and no one comes here but me. You can stay until you figure out what you want to do next." "I cannot ask you to do that," Greta protested. "If Harold finds out, he will make trouble for you. You are not asking, I am offering." Carter's green eyes held hers steadily, and like I said, Harold Pritchard does not scare me. "Why would you help me? You do not even know me." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "My mother ran away from a bad marriage when I was a boy," he said finally. "She took me with her and we had nothing, just the clothes on our backs. A rancher and his wife took us in, gave us shelter and work, and asked for nothing in return except that we help when we could. They saved our lives. I figure I owe it to them to do the same when I can." Greta felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee. "What happened to your mother?" "She is living in California now, married to a good man who treats her right. She writes me letters every month." He smiled slightly. "She would tell me I did the right thing helping you." "Thank you," Greta said softly, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "I do not know what I would have done if I had not found your barn." "You would have found another way," Carter said with certainty. "You are stronger than you think to run like that. Most people would have gone through with the wedding." They sat in companionable silence for a while, drinking coffee as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Eventually, Carter rose and made breakfast, simple fare of eggs and bacon and fresh bread that tasted like heaven to Greta's empty stomach. He gave her one of his shirts and a pair of pants that she had to roll up several times, and she changed out of the wedding dress in his bedroom, leaving the white silk in a crumpled heap on the floor like a shed skin. When she emerged, Carter was mending a bridle, his hands working with practiced skill. He looked up and nodded approvingly. "Much more practical for ranch life. Come on, I will show you where you will be staying." He carried her back to the barn despite her protests, and this time when they climbed to the loft, he showed her how he had already prepared a small space for her. Fresh hay was piled thick for sleeping, and he had brought blankets and a pillow from the house. There was a crate with a lantern on it and another with a jug of water and a cup. "It is not much," he said, looking almost embarrassed, "but it should be comfortable enough." "It is perfect," Greta said honestly. It was more than perfect. It was safety, sanctuary, a place where Harold Pritchard could not reach her. Over the next few days, Greta settled into a strange new routine. She slept in the loft and spent her days helping Carter with small tasks around the ranch, things she could do while her feet healed. She mended his clothes, which badly needed it, and cooked meals in his kitchen, grateful to have something useful to do. He was gone most of the day, working with his small herd of cattle or repairing fences or breaking horses. But he always came back for lunch and dinner, and they would sit at his kitchen table and talk. She learned that he was 26 years old, that he had bought this ranch with money saved from years of working on other people's land, that he was building something of his own from nothing. He loved the work, loved the land, loved the independence of answering to no one but himself. His voice softened when he talked about his horses, and Greta found herself watching his hands as he spoke, the way they moved with unconscious grace. He learned that she was 22, that she had grown up in Hachita helping her father run his general store, that she loved to read but rarely had time for it. She told him about her mother, who had died when Greta was 15, and how she had taken over running the household and helping in the store. She told him about the dreams she used to have, of traveling and seeing the world beyond New Mexico, dreams that had faded as responsibilities piled up. "What stopped you?" Carter asked one evening as they sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of orange and purple. "Life," Greta said simply. "Papa needed me. The store needed me. And women do not just go traveling on their own, you know. It is not proper." "Proper is overrated," Carter said, and she laughed, surprised by the lightness of it. When had she last laughed like that? A week passed, then two. Greta's feet healed, the cuts fading to pink scars. Her skin tanned from working outside, and her hands grew calloused from ranch work. She learned to feed the chickens and gather eggs, to milk the cow, to help Carter groom his horses. She was not sure when the fear started to fade, replaced by something else, something that felt like contentment. But Harold Pritchard had not forgotten about his runaway bride. Greta was hanging laundry when she saw the dust cloud on the horizon, riders approaching fast. Her heart seized in her chest, and she dropped the shirt she had been pinning and ran for the house. Carter was in the barn, and she called his name as she ran, hearing the panic in her own voice. He emerged immediately, took one look at her face and then at the approaching riders, and his expression hardened. "Go inside the house," he said quietly. "Stay away from the windows, Carter, if it is Harold inside. Now." His voice was firm but not unkind, and Greta obeyed, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pressed herself against the wall beside the window, peering out through the edge of the curtain as 5 men rode into the yard. Harold Pritchard sat astride a black stallion that matched his expensive suit and polished boots. He was handsome in a cold, perfect way, with blonde hair and sharp features that would have been attractive if not for the cruelty in his pale blue eyes. The 4 men with him were ranch hands, all armed, all watching Carter with the focused attention of men looking for trouble. "Robbins," Harold said, not bothering to dismount. "I am looking for something that belongs to me." "Nothing here belongs to you," Carter replied evenly, standing relaxed but alert in the center of his yard. Greta could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand rested casually near his hip, where she knew he wore a pistol. "I think you know what I am talking about." A woman, about this tall, dark hair, pretty face, last seen running away from our wedding in a dress that cost more than this entire pathetic ranch. Have not seen anyone matching that description. Harold's eyes narrowed. "Do not lie to me, Robbins. I know she came this way. We tracked her this far before losing the trail. This is the only ranch for miles." "Then I guess she kept running," Carter said with a shrug. "Like I said, no one here but me. You would not mind if we searched the place then." It was not a question, but Carter's expression did not change. "Actually, I would mind very much. This is my property, and you have no right to search it without cause. So unless you have a marshal's warrant, I suggest you get back on your horses and leave." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Harold's jaw tightened, and his hand moved toward his belt, but Carter's hand was already on his gun, drawing it with a speed that made Greta gasp. He did not point it at anyone, just held it loose at his side, but the message was clear. "I am only going to say this once," Carter said, and his voice was cold as winter steel. "Get off my land." For a long moment no one moved. Then Harold smiled, a terrible expression that made Greta's blood run cold. "You are making a mistake, Robbins. When I find her, and I will find her, I am going to remember that you stood in my way." "I will sleep fine at night," Carter replied. Harold jerked his horse's reins, making the animal dance sideways, and then he and his men were riding away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Carter stood watching until they disappeared from sight, and only then did he holster his gun and turn toward the house. Greta met him at the door, her whole body shaking. "He is going to come back. He is going to keep looking." "Maybe," Carter said, but his eyes were troubled. "But he cannot search my land without a warrant, and he cannot get a warrant unless he has proof you are here, which he does not." "I should leave," Greta said, even though the thought made her chest tighten with something close to panic. "I cannot keep putting you in danger like this." "You are not going anywhere," Carter said firmly. He reached out and took her shoulders gently, looking into her eyes. "You are safe here, Greta. I meant what I said. You can stay as long as you need to." "But Harold Pritchard is a bully who is used to getting his way." "Well, he cannot have his way here. This is my land, and you are under my protection." His hands were warm on her shoulders, his eyes intense. "I am not going to let him hurt you. Do you understand?" Greta nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. No one had ever protected her like this before, had ever put themselves at risk for her sake. Her father loved her, she knew, but he was weak, too easily intimidated. Carter was different. Carter stood up to bullies with a quiet strength that made her feel safer than she had ever felt in her life. That night, neither of them could sleep. Greta heard Carter moving around the house, checking the locks on the doors and windows, and eventually she climbed down from the loft and walked to the house. She knocked softly, and he opened the door immediately, as if he had been expecting her. "Cannot sleep either?" he asked, and she shook her head. They sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the cool desert night, and watched the stars wheel overhead. The silence between them was comfortable now, familiar, and Greta found herself leaning slightly against Carter's shoulder, drawing warmth and comfort from his presence. "Tell me about California," she said softly. "About your mother." So he did, his voice low and soothing in the darkness, telling her stories about his childhood, about running away with his mother, about the kindness of strangers and the strength it took to build a new life. His words painted pictures in her mind, and slowly, gradually, the fear faded, replaced by peace. When she finally fell asleep, her head had dropped onto his shoulder, and Carter sat very still, not wanting to wake her. In the starlight, her face looked young and peaceful, free of the worry that usually creased her brow. He thought about Harold Pritchard's threats, about the danger she was in, and made a silent promise to himself. He would keep her safe, no matter what it took. The days turned into weeks, and spring deepened into early summer. The desert bloomed with unexpected flowers, and Greta found herself settling into ranch life with surprising ease. She no longer slept in the loft. Carter had insisted she take his bedroom while he slept on a cot in the main room, though she had protested vigorously. They worked side by side, and slowly, she began to learn the rhythms of the land, the signs that spoke of weather changes and animal movements and the subtle shifts of the seasons. She also began to notice other things. The way Carter's eyes crinkled when he smiled. The sound of his laugh, rare but genuine. The gentleness in his hands when he worked with the horses, the same gentleness he had shown when he washed her torn feet that first morning. She noticed how he always served her first at meals, how he left wildflowers on the kitchen table, how he taught her to ride with patience and encouragement rather than criticism. And she noticed the way her heart beat faster when he came in from the fields, dust-covered and tired but smiling when he saw her. The way her hands tingled when his fingers accidentally brushed hers as they worked together. The way she had started thinking of this small ranch as home, and Carter as something more than just the cowboy who had given her shelter. She was falling in love with him. She realized one morning as she watched him work with a young horse in the corral, his voice low and soothing as he gentled the skittish animal. The realization should have frightened her, should have made her want to run again, but instead it felt right, as natural as breathing. But did he feel the same? He was kind to her, protective, but he had never indicated that his feelings went deeper than simple hospitality. He never touched her beyond what was necessary, never said anything that suggested he saw her as more than a woman in need of help. Perhaps she was just reading too much into his kindness, seeing what she wanted to see. Carter, for his part, was fighting his own internal battle. He had known he was in trouble the morning he found her in his hayloft, bleeding and scared but still defiant, still strong. He had known it even more when she started helping around the ranch, working hard without complaint, learning quickly, fitting into his life as if she had always been meant to be there. And he knew it with absolute certainty every time she smiled at him, every time her laugh filled his small house, every time he caught himself watching her instead of working. He was in love with Greta Emmerson, and it was the worst possible timing. She was running from an engagement, from a man who still posed a threat. She was vulnerable, dependent on him for safety. The last thing she needed was another man trying to claim her, trying to tell her what to do or how to feel. So he kept his distance, kept his feelings locked away, and tried to ignore the way his chest ached every time she looked at him with those warm brown eyes. One afternoon, as they were working together to repair a section of fence, Greta broke the comfortable silence with a question that had been weighing on her mind. "Carter, have you ever been in love?" He nearly dropped the hammer he was holding, and when he looked at her, she was focused intently on the fence post she was holding steady, not meeting his eyes. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious. You are a good man, kind and hardworking. I would think women would be lining up to catch your attention." He laughed, but it sounded forced even to his own ears. Not many women interested in marrying a cowboy with a small ranch and big dreams. Most want someone established, someone who can give them security. "Then they are fools," Greta said quietly, and now she did look at him, her eyes serious. "You are worth 10 of any established man I have ever met." The air between them felt suddenly charged, heavy with words unspoken. Carter wanted to tell her everything, to pull her into his arms and kiss her until they were both breathless, but he forced himself to turn back to the fence instead. "You did not answer my question. Have you ever been in love?" "Once," he admitted. "A long time ago. She married a banker from Santa Fe, said she could not wait for me to make something of myself. I am sorry. Do not be. I realized later that I was not in love with her, not really. I was in love with the idea of her, with having someone to share this life with. But she was not the right person." He drove a nail into the fence post with more force than necessary. The right person would love the life, not just tolerate it while waiting for something better. "The right person would see how lucky she was," Greta said softly, and Carter's heart stuttered in his chest. Before he could respond, the sound of a horse approaching made them both tense. But this time it was not Harold Pritchard, but a young boy on a pony riding fast. Carter recognized him as Timothy, one of the town children, and the expression on his face made Carter's stomach drop. "Mr. Robbins," Timothy gasped, pulling his pony to a stop. My pa sent me to warn you. Mr. Pritchard is in town, talking about how he knows Miss Emerson is here. He is saying he is going to come back with the marshal, saying you kidnapped his fiancée. Kidnapped? Greta's face went white. I came here on my own. He cannot claim I was kidnapped. He is claiming you were not in your right mind, Timothy said, looking miserable. That you had some kind of fit and ran off, and that anyone hiding you is taking advantage of a confused woman. Carter swore under his breath, a rare occurrence that spoke to his anger. Did your father say anything else? Just that the marshal is considering it. Mr. Pritchard has a lot of influence, you know. He donates to the marshal's campaigns. Timothy looked at Greta with worried eyes. I am sorry, miss. My pa wanted you to know so you could be prepared. Thank you, Timothy, Carter said, pulling a coin from his pocket and handing it to the boy. Tell your father I appreciate the warning. They watched the boy ride away, and then Greta turned to Carter with anguish in her eyes. This is exactly what I was afraid of. He is going to twist everything, make it look like you forced me to stay here. You could go to jail because of me. That is not going to happen, Carter said firmly. You do not know that. Harold is smart and he is powerful. If the marshal believes him, then we will fight it. We will tell the truth. And who will they believe? A powerful rancher and businessman or a runaway bride and a small-time cowboy? Greta's voice rose with panic. Carter, you have to let me go. I will turn myself in, tell them you had nothing to do with it, that I was hiding in your barn without your knowledge. Absolutely not. Carter grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. I am not going to let you sacrifice yourself to save me. We will find another way. There is no other way. Tears spilled down her cheeks. He has won. He always wins. Not this time, Carter said, and the determination in his voice made her breath catch. Greta, listen to me. I am not going to let Harold Pritchard take you back. I am not going to let him hurt you. I would rather lose everything I own than see you married to that man. Why? She whispered. Why are you willing to risk so much for me? He stared at her for a long moment, and she could see the war playing out behind his eyes. Then, slowly, carefully, he lifted one hand and cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing away her tears. Because I love you, he said quietly. I have loved you since the morning I found you in my hayloft, brave and scared and beautiful. I have loved you through every day we have spent together, every meal we have shared, every conversation. I love the way you laugh and the way you work, and the way you are not afraid of anything except losing your freedom. And I will not let Harold Pritchard take that freedom from you. I will not. Greta's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. You love me. I know the timing is terrible, Carter said, starting to pull his hand away, but she caught it, held it against her cheek. I know you just escaped one man trying to control your life, and the last thing you need is another man declaring his feelings. I am sorry. I should not have said anything. I love you too, Greta interrupted, and watched his eyes go wide with shock. I think I started falling in love with you that first morning when you cleaned my feet and gave me shelter without asking for anything in return. And I have been falling deeper every day since. You make me feel safe, Carter. You make me feel seen. You never tried to change me or control me or make me into something I am not. You just let me be myself, and that is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Carter pulled her into his arms, and Greta went willingly, pressing her face against his chest and feeling his heart thunder beneath her ear. He held her tight, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other wrapped around her waist, and she felt something inside her that had been wound tight for months finally relax. We will figure this out, he murmured into her hair. Together. I promise you, Greta, we will find a way. She tilted her head back to look at him, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. Then he was lowering his head, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but she did not want to. She rose on her toes to meet him halfway, and when their lips touched, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid of breaking the moment. But then Greta's hand slid up to tangle in Carter's hair, and his arms tightened around her, and the kiss deepened into something more urgent, more passionate. Years of loneliness and fear melted away under the warmth of his mouth, and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Greta felt like a different person than the woman who had run from the church 6 weeks ago. "Marry me," Carter said suddenly, and Greta blinked at him in surprise. "I know it is fast, and I know you just ran away from one wedding, but marry me, Greta. Not because anyone is forcing you, not because of debts or obligations, but because we love each other. If you are my wife, Harold cannot claim you. You will be legally bound to me, not him." "But the engagement, you never actually married him, and an engagement can be broken, especially if you were coerced into it, which you were." Carter's eyes were intense, his hands framing her face. "Say yes. Say you will marry me, and I swear I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret it." Greta thought about the life she had been running toward when she fled the church. She had imagined running away somewhere far from New Mexico, starting over in a place where no one knew her name. But standing here in Carter's arms, looking into his eyes, she realized that she had already found what she was looking for. Home was not a place, it was a person, and her home was here with this man who had given her shelter and safety and love. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." The smile that broke across Carter's face was like the sun rising, bright and warm and full of joy. He kissed her again, and this time there was celebration in it, promise and hope for the future. When they finally broke apart, both of them were grinning like fools. "We should do it soon," Carter said practically, though his eyes were still soft with emotion. "Before Harold can file any charges or cause more trouble. Is there a preacher you trust?" "Father Benedict at the Catholic church in town," Greta said immediately. "He is a good man, and he knows my family. He will understand. Then we will go see him tomorrow. For tonight, let us just—" Carter paused, seeming suddenly uncertain. "Let us just be happy about this, all right. Tomorrow we will deal with Harold and the marshal and everything else. But tonight, let us celebrate." So they did. Carter cooked dinner while Greta set the table with his best dishes, and they ate by candlelight like it was the finest restaurant in the country, instead of a small ranch house kitchen. They talked and laughed and planned their future together, spinning dreams out of nothing but hope and love. And when the evening grew late, Carter walked Greta to the bedroom door and kissed her goodnight with a tenderness that made her heart ache. And then he went to his cot in the main room, because he wanted to do things properly. The next morning, they rode into Hachita together, Greta wearing a simple dress that Carter had bought from the general store the week before. She was nervous about being seen in town, afraid that Harold would somehow learn of their presence, but Carter rode beside her with quiet confidence, and his presence gave her strength. Father Benedict was tending his garden when they arrived, and he looked up with surprise when he saw Greta. "Child," he said, setting down his trowel and rising to his feet. "We have all been so worried about you." "Your father is my father, all right," Greta interrupted, guilt flooding through her. In her fear and newfound happiness, she had not thought enough about how her father must be suffering. "He is well physically," the priest said gently, "but he has been very worried. Harold Pritchard has been making his life difficult, demanding payment of the debts now that the wedding did not happen." "That is partly why we are here," Carter said, dismounting and helping Greta down. "Father, we would like you to marry us." Father Benedict's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. "Marry you? But Miss Emmerson, you just ran from one wedding to a man I did not love and who did not love me." Greta said firmly. Carter is different. I choose this marriage, Father. Freely and willingly. I love him and he loves me, and we want to be married as soon as possible. The priest looked between them, studying their faces, and whatever he saw there must have satisfied him because he nodded slowly. Very well. But I must ask, are you certain this is what you want, Greta? You have been through a great deal of stress. I do not want you rushing into another marriage you might regret. I am more certain of this than I have been of anything in my life, Greta said and took Carter's hand. Please, Father. We need to do this quickly, before Harold can cause more trouble. Father Benedict sighed but nodded. Come inside, then. We will need witnesses, but I can send for some parishioners who can be trusted to be discreet. The wedding was nothing like the elaborate ceremony that had been planned for Greta and Harold. There were no flowers, no musicians, no crowds of people in their finest clothes. Just Greta and Carter, Father Benedict, and two elderly women from the parish who served as witnesses. But when Greta spoke her vows, looking into Carter's eyes and promising to love him until death parted them, she meant every word with a depth of feeling she had never imagined possible. And when Carter slid a simple silver band onto her finger, a ring he had bought from the town jeweler that very morning, and promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life, she saw tears shining in his eyes and knew that he meant it just as deeply. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Father Benedict said with a smile. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Robbins. Carter did, pulling Greta close and kissing her with a sweet passion that made the witnesses giggle and Father Benedict clear his throat. When they broke apart, both of them were grinning, and Greta felt lighter than she had in years, as if a weight she had been carrying had finally been lifted. They signed the marriage certificate, making everything legal and binding, and Father Benedict promised to register it with the territorial authorities immediately. This way, he said, there can be no question of the marriage's validity. You are well and truly wed, and no one can contest it. Thank you, Father, Greta said, hugging the old priest, for everything. Be happy, child, he said, patting her shoulder. You deserve it, and Mr. Robbins, you take good care of her. I will, Carter promised, with my life. They were riding out of town, married and happy and believing that perhaps everything would work out after all, when Harold Pritchard stepped into the street in front of them, flanked by 6 of his men and the town marshal. Carter reined in his horse immediately, his body tensing, and Greta felt her heart sink. Of course it could not be that easy. Of course Harold would find out somehow. Going somewhere, Greta? Harold asked, his voice pleasant but his eyes cold as ice. Or should I say, Miss Emmerson? Because you are certainly not married to this cowboy, no matter what lies he has been telling you. Actually, Father Benedict's voice rang out clearly as he emerged from the church. She is Mrs. Robbins now. I married them myself not an hour ago, properly and legally. The certificate is signed and witnessed and will be registered with the territorial authorities. Harold's face went pale with rage, then red. You had no right, I had every right. Miss Emmerson, now Mrs. Robbins, came to me of her own free will and requested the marriage. She was not coerced or forced. She chose to marry Mr. Robbins, and that is her right as a free woman. She was engaged to me, Harold snarled. She had obligations. An engagement is not a marriage, the priest said calmly. And any engagement entered into under duress to pay her father's debts can hardly be considered binding. Greta made her choice and the law will uphold it. The marshal, a stocky man named Tom Brewster, looked uncomfortable. Mr. Pritchard, if the lady was married legally, there is nothing I can do. You cannot force a woman to marry you if she is already wed to another. This is conspiracy, Harold snapped. They planned this together to cheat me out of what is rightfully mine. I am not a possession, Greta said quietly, but her voice carried clearly in the tense silence. "I am a human being with the right to choose whom I marry, and I choose Carter. I will always choose Carter." Harold's hand moved toward his gun, and instantly Carter was off his horse, positioning himself between Harold and Greta. "Do not," he said softly, but there was steel in his voice. "Do not make this worse than it already is. She is my wife now. Accept it and move on." For a long, terrible moment, Greta thought Harold would draw anyway, would start a gunfight right there in the middle of town. But the marshal stepped forward, his own hand on his weapon. "Mr. Pritchard, I suggest you stand down. You have no legal claim here, and if you draw that weapon, I will have no choice but to arrest you." Harold's jaw worked, his eyes blazing with fury, but finally he stepped back. "This is not over," he said, looking at Carter with pure hatred. "You think you won. You just made an enemy you cannot afford to have." "I can live with that," Carter said evenly. Harold spun on his heel and stalked away, his men following. The marshal tipped his hat apologetically to Carter and Greta. "Sorry about that, folks. Congratulations on your marriage. I hope you will be very happy." "Thank you, Marshal," Carter said, helping Greta back onto her horse with shaking hands. The confrontation had rattled him more than he wanted to admit, but they were safe. Greta was his wife, legally and binding, and there was nothing Harold could do about it. They rode back to the ranch in silence, both processing what had just happened. But when they reached home and Carter helped Greta dismount, she threw her arms around him and held on tight. "It is really over," she whispered. "I am free. We are married and Harold cannot touch me." "It is really over," Carter agreed, holding her close. "You are mine and I am yours, and nothing is going to change that." That evening they celebrated their marriage properly, with a dinner of the best food they could prepare and a bottle of wine Carter had been saving for a special occasion. They sat on the porch as the sun set, watching the desert turn gold and pink and purple, and talked about their future together. "I want to expand the ranch," Carter said, his arm around Greta's shoulders. "Maybe get more cattle, build a bigger barn. Make this place into something we can be proud of." "I want to help," Greta said. "I want to learn everything about ranching, be a true partner in this, and maybe someday when we are more established, we could think about starting a family." Carter kissed the top of her head. "I would like that. I would like that very much." That night, for the first time, Greta did not sleep in the bedroom alone, and Carter did not sleep on the cot in the main room. They came together as husband and wife, their love expressed in touches and whispers and the quiet joy of two people who had found each other against all odds. And when Greta fell asleep in Carter's arms, she felt completely and utterly safe for the first time in months. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Harold Pritchard, true to his word, tried to make trouble. He filed complaints with the territorial authorities, claiming that Carter had kidnapped his fiancée. He spread rumors around town, trying to damage Carter's reputation. He even tried to buy up Carter's debts from various creditors, hoping to force him to sell the ranch. But Carter and Greta weathered every storm together. Father Benedict testified on their behalf, along with the witnesses to their marriage. Greta's father, once he heard about the marriage, came forward and gave a statement about Harold's threats and the coercion involved in the engagement. And the townspeople of Hatcheta, who had never particularly liked Harold despite his wealth and influence, rallied around the young couple. Timothy's father, it turned out, owned the bank that held Carter's ranch mortgage, and he refused to sell it to Harold. Other creditors followed suit. And slowly, Harold Pritchard realized that he had lost not just Greta, but the goodwill of the entire community. 6 months after their wedding, word came that Harold had sold his ranch and moved to Texas. Greta felt nothing but relief when she heard the news. That chapter of her life was finally, truly closed. In the spring following their marriage, Greta discovered she was pregnant. Carter's joy was so profound and pure that it made her cry, and he spent the next months treating her like precious glass, despite her laughing protests that she was perfectly capable of continuing to work. Their son was born in December, during a cold snap that brought snow to the desert, a rare and beautiful sight. They named him Thomas, after Carter's father, and he had his mother's dark hair and his father's green eyes. Carter held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, and Greta fell in love with her husband all over again, watching him cradle their baby with such tenderness. Greta's father became a regular visitor to the ranch, overjoyed to have a grandson and grateful to have his daughter happy and safe. He had managed to pay off his debts, with some help from Carter, and the general store was thriving again. The rift that had opened between them during the engagement crisis slowly healed, and Greta was able to forgive him for the impossible position they had both been in. 2 years later, a daughter followed, and they named her Rose. She had Carter's temperament, calm and patient, while Thomas had inherited his mother's spirit and determination. Watching them grow up on the ranch, running through the fields and learning to ride horses and helping with chores, filled Greta with a contentment she had never imagined possible. The ranch prospered under their joint care. Greta proved to have a natural head for business, managing their finances and negotiating deals with buyers, while Carter focused on the day-to-day operations and expanding their herd. They became known throughout New Mexico as a model of what a partnership could be, husband and wife working side by side to build something lasting. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Carter took Greta back to the barn where they had first met. He had transformed the hayloft into a cozy space with a real bed and curtains, and even a small stove, and he surprised her with a romantic dinner overlooking the ranch they had built together. "You ever regret it?" he asked as they sat watching the sunset, much as they had on their wedding night. "Running away. Choosing this life instead of what your father had planned." Greta looked at her husband, at the man who had given her shelter when she needed it most, who had protected her and loved her and built a life with her. She thought about Thomas and Rose, asleep in the house with their grandfather watching them. She thought about the ranch, their home, the community they had become part of, and she smiled. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. Running to your hayloft was the best decision I ever made." Carter kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. "And letting you stay was the best decision I ever made." 3 more children followed over the years, 2 more sons and another daughter. The ranch continued to grow, eventually becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Carter and Greta hired workers and paid them fair wages, treated them with respect, and created a community that felt more like family than employees. They faced hardships, of course. Droughts and harsh winters, illness and injury, the normal struggles of ranch life. But they faced everything together, their love and partnership only growing stronger with each challenge overcome. And on the hard days, when everything seemed to be going wrong, they would walk out to the barn together and climb up to the loft where their story had begun, and remember the scared runaway bride and the cowboy who had offered her sanctuary. Years passed, and their children grew and had children of their own. The ranch that Carter had built from nothing became a legacy passed down through generations. And through it all, through decades of joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle, Carter and Greta remained devoted to each other. Their love as strong in their twilight years as it had been that night when he found her hiding in his hay. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren, Carter stood and raised a glass to his wife. His hair was silver now, his face lined with wrinkles earned from years of laughing and living, but his eyes still held that same warmth they had the morning he climbed into the hayloft and offered her his hand. "To Greta," he said, his voice still strong despite his years. "The woman who ran into my life in a wedding dress and bare feet and changed everything. You could have kept running that night. You could have gone anywhere. But you stayed, and you trusted me, and you gave me the greatest gift I have ever received. You gave me your heart. I promise I have treasured it every single day, and I will continue to treasure it for whatever time we have left." Greta stood and kissed him, not caring that their entire family was watching, not caring about anything except this man who had been her shelter, her partner, her love for 50 years. "And you gave me freedom," she whispered against his lips. "The freedom to choose my own path, to be myself, to love without fear. Thank you for that, Carter. Thank you for everything." The celebration continued long into the night, filled with music and laughter and the joy of family. And later, when everyone had gone home or settled into the guest rooms, Carter and Greta walked out to the barn one more time. They climbed the ladder to the loft, moving slowly now but still sure-footed, and sat in the space where their story had begun. "You remember that night?" Greta asked, leaning against Carter's shoulder. "How scared I was." "I remember thinking you were the bravest woman I had ever met," Carter replied, his arm around her, "and the most beautiful, even covered in hay and dirt and tears." "I thought you were my salvation," Greta said softly. "And I was right, but you were so much more than that. You were my partner, my friend, my love. You were everything I needed and everything I did not even know I wanted." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars through the open loft door, two people who had found each other in the darkness and built a life together in the light. The ranch spread out below them, generations of love and work made manifest in land and buildings and family. "I would do it all again," Carter said suddenly. "Every struggle, every hard day, every moment of fear or doubt, I would do it all again exactly the same way just to end up here with you." "So would I," Greta agreed. "So would I." When they finally made their way back to the house, moving slowly but together, the moon had risen full and bright over the New Mexico desert. Behind them, the barn stood quiet and solid, a testament to where it all began, and Greta thought about the woman she had been that night, running through the darkness in a wedding dress, desperate and alone. If she could go back and tell that frightened girl what was waiting for her in the hayloft, what would she say? That she would find love, that she would find home, that the cowboy who offered her shelter would become the center of her entire world. All of that was true, but it was not the whole truth. The whole truth was simpler and more profound. In that hayloft, she had found herself. Carter had not saved her, though it had felt like salvation at the time. He had given her space to save herself, to find her own strength, to choose her own path. And in choosing him, she had chosen freedom. That was the real gift he had given her, and the gift she had given him in return. Not rescue, but partnership. Not control, but trust. Not possession, but love in its purest, most generous form. The years continued to pass, gentle and swift as a river. Thomas took over the main operations of the ranch, with his siblings all playing their parts in the family business. The ranch continued to prosper, a testament to the foundation that Carter and Greta had built together. And Carter and Greta themselves settled into a peaceful old age, content to advise and guide, but no longer needing to carry the weight of the work themselves. They spent their days together, as they always had, walking the land they loved, sitting on the porch and watching the sunset, telling stories to their grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And every year on their anniversary, they would climb up to the hayloft and remember the beginning, when a scared woman in a wedding dress had run into the darkness and found a cowboy who understood that sometimes the greatest act of love is simply letting someone stay until they are ready to trust. Carter Robbins passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 81, with Greta holding his hand and his family surrounding his bed. He had lived a good life, a full life, and he left the world knowing he was loved and that his legacy would continue through the children and grandchildren he had raised. Greta grieved, as anyone would grieve the loss of their other half, but she did not break. Carter had taught her too well how to be strong. She continued to live on the ranch, surrounded by family, still sharp and engaged with the world around her. She told stories about Carter to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive through words and love. She lived another 7 years without him, and on the day she passed, also peacefully and surrounded by love, her last words were about the night she ran away. "I found him in the hay," she whispered to Rose, who was holding her hand. "My cowboy, my Carter, and he let me stay." They buried her next to Carter on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a cottonwood tree they had planted together 50 years before. The entire community turned out for the funeral. 3 generations of people whose lives had been touched by the love story of the runaway bride and the cowboy who gave her shelter. And the ranch continued, passed down to Thomas, and then to his children, and then to theirs. Each generation adding their own chapters to the story, but never forgetting the foundation. The barn still stands, though it has been repaired and expanded over the years, and the hayloft where it all began has been preserved as a kind of shrine, a reminder of where the family's legacy began. Young couples sometimes ask to be married there, in that hayloft where love first bloomed, and the family always says yes. Because the story of Carter and Greta is not just their story. It is a story about courage and kindness, about choosing love over fear, about the transformative power of trust. It is a story that deserves to be remembered and celebrated and passed down through generations. The runaway bride who hid in the hayloft became a ranch wife, a mother, a grandmother, a matriarch of a family that would span generations. And the cowboy who let her stay until she was ready to trust became her partner in building a legacy that would outlast them both. They were not perfect people, and their life together was not without struggle, but their love was real and deep and lasting. In the end, that is all any of us can hope for, to find someone who sees us, truly sees us and loves us anyway. To build something lasting with that person, something that will continue after we are gone. To leave the world a little better than we found it, a little more filled with love. Carter and Greta did all of that and more. Their story began with fear and flight, but it transformed into something beautiful, a testament to what can happen when 2 people choose to trust each other, to work together, to love without reservation. And though they are long gone now, their story lives on in the land they tended, in the family they created, in the love that still echoes through the old barn on quiet desert nights. The hayloft remains, a simple space that holds an extraordinary story. And sometimes, on anniversary nights, members of the family will climb up there and sit in the hay, looking out over the ranch that Carter and Greta built, and they will remember. They will remember that love can begin in the most unexpected places, that courage sometimes looks like running away, and that the greatest act of kindness is sometimes simply offering shelter to someone who needs it and letting them stay until they are ready to trust. That is the legacy of Carter Robbins and Greta Emmerson Robbins, the cowboy and the runaway bride whose love story became the foundation of a family, a ranch, and a reminder that even in the hardest of times, in the wildest of places, love can flourish and grow and last forever. Their story is complete now, every chapter written, Every promise kept, every moment of love celebrated and remembered. And in a hayloft in New Mexico, where it all began, their love story lives on, eternal and true, a beacon of hope for anyone who has ever been scared and alone and in need of shelter. Because sometimes when you run into the darkness, you do not find an ending. Sometimes you find a beginning. And if you are very lucky, you find a love that will last not just a lifetime but forever, echoing through generations and inspiring others to choose courage, choose trust, and choose love. The end of their story is really just the beginning of a legacy that will continue as long as the ranch stands, as long as the family remembers, as long as the story is told. And in that way, Carter and Greta are not really gone at all. They live on in every sunset over the ranch, in every child learning to ride, in every couple standing in the hayloft and promising to love each other forever. They live on in the land they loved and the family they created and the story they wrote together, one day at a time, one act of love at a time, one choice to trust at a time. Their happily ever after was not perfect, because life never is. But it was real, and it was theirs, and it was filled with more love than either of them could have imagined that night when a scared woman in a wedding dress climbed into a hayloft, and a kind cowboy decided to let her stay. That simple act of compassion changed two lives, created a family, and built a legacy. And that, in the end, is the truest kind of magic there is.